For over half a century, Canada has been a world leader in the production, use, and development of life-saving medical isotopes. The world is counting on Canada to expand this leadership role to support the diagnosis and treatment of cancer, ensuring medical equipment is safe for use, and to tackle some of our greatest challenges in health sciences. Welcome to the Canadian Nuclear Isotope Council's Isotopes for Hope podcast with your host, James Scongack, Chair of the CNIC. In this series, we interview Canadian leaders who are making a difference every day. We hope you enjoy this episode of the Isotopes for Hope podcast.
I want to thank everybody for joining us today for this edition of our Isotopes for Hope podcast. With me today, I have Ram Mullur, who's with Chalk River National Labs and Actineer. And we're looking forward to a great discussion today on life-saving medical isotopes. But most importantly, Ram, we're carrying out today's podcast at the Mars Discovery Center in downtown Toronto here on University Avenue at the Canadian Theranostics Leadership Summit, co-hosted between the Canadian Nuclear Isotope Council, University Health Network, and the Canadian Medical Isotope Ecosystem. So it's a great gathering of industry leaders, not only from here throughout Canada, but also around the world. And before we get into the discussion with Ram, I really appreciate him taking the time to join us today and share his insights. He's an accomplished executive with more than 2.5 decades of broad industry experience, primarily focused in business development, medical isotopes, and the broader radiopharmaceutical landscape. He currently serves as the vice president of CNL's isotope business and the further advancement of their Actinium-225 program, but frankly, a range of medical isotopes. And for those of you that may not be familiar with CNL, CNL is the true Canadian national gem of nuclear innovation, of nuclear research, and I often refer to it as really the birthplace of, really the world's advancement in medical isotopes over the last 50 years. In addition to Ram's current role, he served in a number of leading executive and roles across the radiopharmaceutical industry, and has an experience both in the acquisition, investments, licensing, commercial, and strategic partnerships to advance a significant number of areas in the field of radiopharmaceuticals. So not only are we thrilled to have Ram with us today, but really thrilled to have a leader like Ram here in Canada and as part of Canada's nuclear isotope sector. So thanks for joining us, Ram.
Thank you, James. It's been an honor.
So Ram, really want to kind of start with the basics. The organization that you play a significant leadership role in has a long history in medical isotopes. And I think that's a history that a lot of Canadians don't fully understand or realize. Can you talk with us a bit about the role that CNL has historically played in the production of isotopes and what you're up to these days?
Sure. Thank you, James. So absolutely, CNL and the previous incarnations of CNL, AECL, has really been pivotal in not only putting Canada in the forefront in the isotope space, but really shaping the industry by itself. We wouldn't have nuclear medicine at these coordinates we are in today without CNL. CNL's NRU reactor was at some point producing more than half of life-saving and life-altering isotopes like molybdenum, iodine-131. And at a time when the nuclear medicine industry was in formative stages. So we are pretty much the bedrock and foundation in many ways of what we call our industry today. Absolutely.
And I think the commentary you share with us on Chalk River is so important because it's hard to believe around the world we would have some of the uses of medical isotopes, some of these diagnostics and treatments for cancer without the work of people up at CNL. And one of the things that has always amazed me about Chalk River and CNL is just the number of scientists and experts that you have there. Can you talk a little bit about the site that you operate, and just give people a sense of the size of the scale and the number of professionals that are employed at that site here in Canada.
Yeah, so we have been continuously reinventing ourselves from what we were. What I think was the bedrock and foundational generation. What we are doing right now is really setting up CNL in Canada for the next generation of nuclear technology and industrial support. We have currently about 4,000 people, and that number changes and increases every day. And we are continuously hiring, we're continuously training, we're continuously onboarding scientists, not only scientists, engineers, technologists, and tradespeople. So we are building, if somebody were to visit today and they have a recollection of what the site was 8 years ago, it's tremendous difference and quite transformational, and more to come. We are building one of the most state-of-the-art ANMRC facility, which will really be is being built to serve the nuclear industry of the future. We have a Science Collaboration Center, which has been newly built. It's one of the most modern constructions for office buildings. And that is where really we are, it's going to be our platform to bring in more collaborations in the industry, academia as well. So all in all, I mean, it's a campus, huge, vast campus. People know it. It's hundreds of acres. And really, we are transforming that every year. So yeah, I'm very proud to be part of CNL.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I think when people around the world, they think of Silicon Valley in terms of what Silicon Valley does, in many ways, areas like Chalk River, Durham region, southwestern Ontario, Vancouver, I mean, the McMaster, Hamilton area, we're really the Silicon Valley of isotopes here in Canada. And I think it's amazing. So I now want to shift and I want to talk about Actinium-225. Before we get into the work that you and ITM are doing on Actinium-225, can you just walk us through what's important about Actinium-225? What is it, and what role does it play today in the fight against cancer, and what role do you think it'll play going forward?
Sure. So first of all, our industry, nuclear medicine, is making a decisive leap or pivoting from being predominantly a diagnostic industry to a mainstream therapeutic modality industry. And that change is happening gradually, but most rapidly in the last 10 years. So as that change happens, we're going to see emphasis on isotopes like actinium, as well as lutetium recently, as you're well aware of. What these isotopes are basically more powerful tools to really cure cancer, and they have the ability to be able to be engineered or scientifically linked to targeting moieties, where those targeting drugs attached and latched to these isotopes really chase the disease specifically into the body with the precision and accuracy which was unprecedented before.
And I love your description. In previous podcasts with ITM and others, we've talked a lot about these theranostic isotopes that are like heat-seeking missiles, and that's really what actinium is. And you know, oftentimes people hear about actinium, they hear about lutetium, and you know, what we always like to remind people is actinium is a cyclotron-based isotope that you can produce in isotopes, and lutetium is a reactor-based, and so these really aren't in competition with each other; they're working together. Is that fair?
Yeah, absolutely. And lutetium is beta, adding further to the nuance there. Lutetium is a beta emitter and actinium is an alpha emitter. So both are very valuable. Both have their attributes. Both have their functionality. And they're definitely not in competition. Many of the trials which are going on today are called tandem trials, wherein there is a dose of lutetium being tried and then followed up with actinium. So as you know, in medicine, and doctors deploy multiple ways to solve these kind of life-destroying diseases.
So that's the importance of actinium. So you have partnered with ITM. Can you talk about the partnership that you formed? You formed a new entity. Kind of walk us through the strategy here now to turn that vision into a reality that you're advancing.
Sure. So Actineer is basically a joint venture between ITM and CNL, what we've really done is brought in complementary know-how which resides in both organizations, quite synergistic know-how together in Actineer, and to create a platform to build a new business together out of Canada. So I think it's a great success story for Canada, a great success story for Germany, and a great success story potentially for the nuclear medicine community.
And on a previous podcast, for anybody that hasn't had to listen to it, we did have Stefan on from ITM, and a great global success story. But most importantly, I think what's important about ITM is that it really has become an important linkage for all of many players in the isotope sector to plug into the international market. So I think that's great. Can you talk a bit about Canada? I mean, you've worked all around the world. You've got a broad perspective on this sector. Can you talk about your view of the role that Canada plays and the imperative for us to continue to play a leadership role?
Sure. So I think it's important for Canada and for all of us to really recognize and credit ourselves for the disproportionate amount of success we've caused for the industry. I think we've punched above our weight. We've done, compared to our size of the economy, we have delivered a disproportionate amount of success for this industry, and that is something we still have, whether we have certain assets or not. We have the infrastructure, we have the talent, we have the academic bedrock, which needs to be built up further to train people in the isotopes in the radiopharma space. And the world knows Canada. I mean, Canada is a smaller economy, but when it comes to isotopes and nuclear medicine, Canada is at the forefront, and that's a testimony to what all our efforts should focus on to really build that legacy for the next generation of isotope success.
And I want to thank you and CNL for your leadership in the Canadian Nuclear Isotope Council. I think CNL is absolutely critical to our collective goal of doubling isotope production in Canada by 2030. And really you have a playbook that the sector here can follow. I want to talk now a bit about public policy and government. We obviously have a very strong sector here. You talked about all of those components. Here at the Theranostics Leadership Summit, we have a significant amount of support at the municipal level, at the provincial level, and federal level. If you were talking to the Prime Minister today, what would you ask him to consider doing in terms of supporting this sector? And he's not on the phone yet.
Yeah.
So a minute to think about it.
Absolutely. So, now, like I said, Canada has been a leader, has the potential to continue to be the leader in this field. If I were to, I really think we have to build up the academic platform further, because without academic training, the industry is going to be hamstrung eventually. So the support from governments for schools, for the universities, for the PhD programs, for the graduate programs, which involve isotope and radiopharmaceuticals, is key. The good or the bad news about talent is we are in competition. Our industry is in competition for the same scientists, same engineers, with several other technology areas, whether it's AI, whether it's a semiconductor industry. So isotope is one element where there's a huge draw of talent. So we need to, the government and the academic institutions need to be really supported to build the talent pipeline. And then the next stage is industry. So that talent has to be absorbed and kept within the industry, kept within Canada. So that means we need to have supports like what we already see, SHRED, ICID SHRED program, the innovation tax credit, really enable industry to flourish and to invest and to take risks, the healthy kind of risks, the likes of which this industry needs to be able to say, okay, this is the place for me to come and invest and stay. I think a great analog for that kind of support is what we've seen in vaccine recently, the e-vehicles, the battery. I think that's a great analog for how industry and the government can work together for the larger benefit of the public.
So Ram, I think that's a great perspective, and one of the big takeaways for me of the last 5 to 6 years, the CNIC has been, whether it's the Trudeau government in Ottawa, the Ford government here in Ontario, other provincial governments across the country, municipal governments. This is an issue that, firstly, people want to learn more about. It is that true Canadian success story you talked about, but it's exactly the kind of public policy issue and Canadian leadership posture that we can all unite on. And I think that's really important. And your point around the people capability is so important, because sometimes in that Bruce Power, we're in a technical business, you're in a technical business. It's very easy to focus on those technical assets, power reactors, cyclotrons, laboratories. But at the end of the day, the real capability is in people. And we have a very unique opportunity here in Canada to not only develop that pipeline, but keep that pipeline with very exciting, meaningful work underway. I want to talk about sort of Chalk River as you talked a lot about the evolution of CNL and how you've consistently worked to almost reinvent yourself. It's a true Canadian success story, but it's gone through a lot of changes in our energy sector and in Canada. And as you've gone through this process of this very unique and innovative partnership with ITM, what is your advice to industry from a partnership perspective? I know from working with you and your team, you very much value partnerships and coalitions and joint ventures. Can you just share your sort of industry perspective on that? And what message would you leave to people in this sector around how we should go about stronger joint ventures and partnerships?
Sure. Thanks, James. So I think it's about really understanding our strengths, respective strengths, and not doing something which others can do better.
Yeah.
And that saves time, that saves money, and that really basically makes it more effective and efficient to do anything, right? So the key is to understand who best fit, what's the complementariness, right? Where does the synergy appear in joining forces? There are some companies which are great, but they may not be synergistic. So it's the real secret sauce to understand where the complementariness reside, and to really build on that complementary and synergistic factors, and culturally as well, right? Today's world is increasingly globalized compared to 40 years ago, wherein we could do a lot of stuff within our frontiers, but everything today is so much globalized, so much transatlantic,
Right.
So it's important to really build and really gain from that kind of a pool of talent as well, because it's not only globalization is not only markets, globalization is also talent.
Right.
Today we can seek talent from so many different places, and vice versa.
And maybe just on that note, one of the things a lot of people have a tough time sort of conceptualizing is when we think about the growth in demand for medical isotopes from a global perspective. Can you just walk us through how you view that? We have here a country here in Canada, relatively small, 40 million people. We've got population growth all over the world. How should we think about, especially in countries that are, really massive population growth, large populations of people, in terms of the demands that will come out of some of those jurisdictions for medical isotopes?
It's a great point, right? The way our industry has grown, it is not completely pegged to the demographic and population, as you know. I mean, some of the largest demographies, like India and China, have not been traditionally isotope and radiopharma based in markets, right?
Why is that?
It is because of, I might dare to say, it is because of how isotopes and nuclear industry was developed.
Right.
If you go back 50, 60 years, where and who developed the nuclear capabilities.
Right.
That's the reason. And all of a sudden, in 1950s and 60s, there was a move to use nuclear for peaceful purposes. So wherever the infrastructure, the investments were made back in those days, back in those decades, is where the more peaceful ways to use isotopes develop. So that basically leaves North America and parts of Europe.
Right. And if we look at it from a people perspective, just in those two countries alone, you have 2 billion plus people that want access to the same kind of cancer diagnostics and treatments that we have here in Canada.
Yep.
And we want those folks to have access to the best treatment. So I think that just puts it in perspective when you consider the population of some of those jurisdictions with the population that's very embedded in medical isotopes between Europe, Canada, and the US and other countries. Thanks very much for that international perspective. I think that's really important. Final question. Let's say we're sitting here 10 years from now. Where do you think Canada will be in 10 years on medical isotopes? So
if I were to project where we are today to 10 years, I would say, first of all, radiopharmaceuticals will be a lot larger fraction of oncology than it is today, right? I'll get the numbers wrong, but if we talk about the oncology therapeutics today at about $300 billion worldwide, radiopharmaceuticals is about 6 to 7 billion. So in 10 years' time, the oncology therapeutics is going to grow significantly, but what we're going to see is the pie of the radiopharmaceuticals will be disproportionately growing. So we'll be playing a bigger and more relevant role in cancer treatment than we do today. And Canada has the potential to be a strong player in that growth.
Well, let's schedule that discussion in 10 years from today.
Yes.
I agree with you. I think you're right. It's a great opportunity. I want to thank you very much for joining us today. I also want to thank all of the listeners who have been participating and listening in this podcast. I find every one of these discussions interesting and informative. But I think what's really important here, Ram, for our listeners is that you're able to help us share this message. This is not only a great Canadian success story, but a real opportunity for our country to continue to make a growing and meaningful difference. And we'd ask people to share this on their social media, whether it's this podcast, information from the CNIC, because this is a very important message to get out. So I want to thank you very much for your leadership and for joining us today.
Thank you, James. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks, Ram.
Always fun to meet you and talk to you.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Canadian Nuclear Isotope Council Isotopes for Hope podcast with James Scongack. Please share this podcast and follow us to stay in the loop. To learn more, please visit our website at canadianisotopes.ca.